Take-TwoStrauss Zelnick, CEO of the video game company behind Red Dead Redemption 2, on the first question, he asks the people he mentors. People are fascinated by the fact that Strauss Zelnick is 61 years old. They seem to be fascinated by this primarily because he looks extremely not 61. Hence his recently published book Becoming Ageless, The 4 Secrets to Looking and Feeling Younger Than Ever. But there are plenty of other reasons to find the dude fascinating. He's also CEO of video game powerhouse Take-Two Interactive, Think, NBA 2K, Grand Theft Auto, and the much-acclaimed Red Dead Redemption 2, a founder of the private equity firm Zelnick Capital Media, and was recently appointed chairman of the CBS Board of Directors. This isn't new for him. Nearly 3 decades ago, Zelnick was named COO of 20th Century Fox when was still just 32. So you might say he was defying age long before he hit his 60s. Here, he explains the importance of writing down goals and values, why it's a mistake to focus on outcome instead of action, and the question he asks people who come to him for advice. What is one habit, or practice you have in your life now that you can't believe you ever operated without? Probably the biggest change has been having some spiritual life. That practice is about 8 years old. That's been a real game changer. In the book, it's one of the 4 elements of my recommendations for living an ageless life, having some kind of spiritual practice. What about that has been so game-changing for you? It's a way for me to establish, every morning, the difference between what I can have an influence on and what I can't. It sets a tone and an intention for the day. And it's a daily reminder of the relatively, or very, insignificant role that any of us plays in the greater scheme of things. Starting the day with some sense of humility and proportion, for me, has been really helpful. You run the risk of just diving in and trying to make stuff happen all day. And you can lose sight of reality. Was there a time where maybe you didn't understand how to differentiate the things you can control and the things you can't? Laughs, yes. It's tempting when you've made a change to look back to the period prior to the change and describe it as black and white. I think I always had some sense of proportion, but certainly there were times when I was utterly focused on an outcome, as opposed to being appropriately focused on taking right action and understanding that the outcome of that action was not entirely within my control. Understanding that difference has probably freed me up to take more effective action, and also freed me from being too hard on myself when things don't go exactly as I'd like. You seem like a guy who's big on consistency. Do you have ways in which you design your environment for success, to allow you to do the things you want to do? One of the tricks that I've really focused on of late is not bringing my device to the gym or to meals. I write down my workouts in advance because I think it's easier to comply with it. What I've learned to do now is instead of keeping it in my phone, I write it down on a piece of paper so that I won't have my phone in the gym, which means I won't pick up my phone, which means I'm at no risk of getting distracted by my phone. And equally, when I'm having a meal with other people, I try really hard not to bring my device unless I have something pretty critical going on. Because it just takes away from the interaction you're having. I'm not a big fan of apparently successful people listing all their life hacks because, first of all, most of them don't turn to be true when you really scratch the surface. And also everyone has a different style, and numerous styles can be successful. I don't know that my style would work for anyone else. I think that's really important. Certain books come to mind, and they just seem like recipes for making your life more complicated and less happy. Instead of saying, look, embrace your own style, but certainly if your life isn't working for you, think about making changes. How do you engage with email and text? Do you have a set time you respond, or how does that work? I try really hard to respond very quickly to any messages, email, text, or phone. I always have. I'm fortunate to be able to lead large organizations, and my view is the CEO doesn't do very much work. Real work doesn't take place in the CEO's office. So if someone is communicating with me, it's usually relatively meaningful to them, and requires a meaningful and thoughtful but relatively rapid response. Became COO of 20th Century Fox at 32. I'm curious how you learned to deal with doubt, both from yourself and from people who doubted you. I have this odd ability to capture two thoughts simultaneously. One has a good deal of confidence I get a hard job done, even if it's a job that I'm not necessarily well suited to do, and, on the other hand, I can think to myself, I'll never be able to do this. I think I probably had those sentiments when I started at Fox. On one hand, oh my god, how am I ever gonna pull this off? I'm young and inexperienced. On the other hand, well, I have some experience and I work hard, I'm thoughtful, a pretty good listener, I'll figure it out. How have you changed since those days? I would say the biggest material difference is I became much more willing to be myself and understand that wouldn't be to everyone's liking and be okay with that, not necessarily happy about that, but be okay with it. I think I was more prepared to present myself as how I really am, as opposed to how I thought I should come across. And I think that makes you a more effective leader in maybe not all, but most instances. You said something on Dan Harris' 10% Happier podcast that I was hoping we could unpack a little bit. You said, knowing what you want is the key to getting what you want. I'm curious why you think so many people don't ever figure that out. I spend a quarter of my time mentoring and coaching people, and the first thing I ask is, what do you want? Not what you were told you should want, not what you think sounds good on a resume. What do you really want out of life? From pretty much my earliest memory, I wanted to run a movie studio. I achieved that goal a lot earlier than I expected to, so then I revised my goal to running and owning at least a significant piece of a large, diverse media conglomerate. Which is what my team has built over the past 18 years after having a bunch of jobs. I also knew I wanted to be happily married, I wanted to have kids, I wanted to live in the Northeast, I wanted to have time for leisure. I didn't want to work all the time. And I don't. I don't mean to imply this is a perfect life because I don't even know what that would mean, but I definitely have the life I set out to get, more or less. I encourage people to look at this as if you're painting a watercolor where your life will be not tomorrow or next year, but in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Because that time will pass, God willing. And you will find yourself there, even if today that seems odd. Paint the watercolor so it's big enough that there's room to maneuver, but specific enough that you can go in that direction. And again, I emphasize the personal as well as the professional, because they're both terribly important. At the end of the day, for me, knowing what I wanted personally and professionally led me to make choices that were in service of those goals. Once you know what you want, how do you keep it front and center, and how do you continually monitor it, and adjust or calibrate, as your desires and goals change? I encourage people to write down a list of your values, which is a description of who you are. And goals, which is descriptive of what you want. And keep it in your device, or whatever's convenient for you. I keep mine in my device and review it regularly. Probably every few weeks. It shouldn't be an idealized list, it should be an actual list. So anytime the values don't reflect who you are, you should either change your behavior or change the list. If you write down your goals, you write down your values, and review them regularly, and you're brutally honest with yourself about them, then human nature would be either to adjust them, or to comply with them. This interview has been edited and condensed. More stories like this one